There we go, back into the recording for everybody there. And just before we were broken off, or I was discussing some of its subjects and themes of Frankenstein, and I'd mentioned Galvanism, which was shown there in the picture, some of the lectures and experiments from London that Shelley was witness to, in which led people to truly believe that electricity might be the spark of life, rather like the spark of life, kinistan, the spark of life in the Bible, the breath of God that goes into Adam. And so these sort of questions about the finality of death, the possibility of resurrection. So Frankenstein is both sort of resurrected and created, making it a very macabre and gothic setting for the entire film, textbook. Do excuse me. Um, the themes of power, of creator and created, of master and slave, which could easily be reminiscent of the themes of master and slave in Robinson Crusoe, and of sexual power, as Frankenstein, the monster, is looking for. I've written Bride of Frankenstein there, it's the name of a movie, but the monster goes back to its creator and wants the creator to make it a bride, understanding that without an Eve to his Adam, having read the Bible, that he would not be able to have a place in the world. And so these ideas of sort of what is paradise, can we create it? The Adam and Eve story that are very, very strong, and themes of sexual power that run through most of the Gothic, certainly in Jane Eyre, that you can compare this book to later and think about in terms of this book. They're also present in the Scarlet Letter from 1850 as well, the same sort of sexual power and sexuality, and sort of plays on it with biblical themes. They're very strong in all of these three books, and books that you could definitely compare together. The romantic hero and the figure of the hero that's prevalent in a lot of our tales. We're going to see it with Rochester as a potential romantic hero or even anti-hero. That's the thing about the Byronic hero or romantic hero, that he or she is generally quite troubled and a dark figure, often darkly clad. Here we have a question of whether the monster could be potentially as the hero of the piece, is noble on the inside, and yet obviously judged even by the blind as being ignoble, as being evil because of appearances. So you have this very large issue of what it means to be human, whether you could simply create a human or not, and who is the monster in this piece particularly then. We also touched on the fact that the sort of the monster stems from, this idea does stem from the Golem story, which is a sort of intertextual replay from the Kabbalah, which is in the Zohar, one of the three great Jewish books. There's the Torah, the Talmud, and the Zohar, and it's the book of Babylonian Jewish mysticism, which includes this sort of the Sefer Yetzirah, with this numerological way of conjuring up a golem, of breathing life into dead clay. The 1831 edition, which you just have a little sort of breeze through so as not to take up too much time, has quite a few interesting points that you can pick up on about setting, particularly as well, and something about this of time. If we look over here, I'm just going to read and try and clip through some passages. In the summer of 1816, we visited Switzerland and became neighbours of Lord Byron. At first, we spent our pleasant hours on the lake, wandering on its shores, yada, 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 yada. But it proved a wet, ungenial summer, an incessant rain or 5 days, now factor known as a year without summer. We'll have a look at. There was a volcanic eruption on Mount Tabor in Indonesia in 1815, and the dust cloud actually made the harvests fail in Europe and produced this sort of dark brooding summer that Shelley wrote Frankenstein in. Byron wrote The Vampire, and lots of these sort of ghost stories, gothic romantic stories, came from this meeting um, of the group in Switzerland. I'm going to just try and sort of slip through reasonably quickly and find the bits. As you see here, Byron says to the group, this seems to be in itself a piece of myth making by Shelley and framing the story around this sort of myth of them together. We will each write a ghost story, says Byron, and they will accede to this idea. Um, and she tries to think of a story. I'm going to try and sort of fast forward through this as well. And as we go on to the last page of this little preface that's been added to the 1831 edition, she has a dream, as we see here as well. She talks about scientific ideas of Darwin and of galvanism, as you can see up here as well. Perhaps a corpse would be reanimated. Galvanism had given tokens of such things. Perhaps the component parts of a creature might be manufactured, brought together, and endued with vital warmth. So she actually has this sort of dream, which she then bases Frankenstein on. And so there's a little sort of, you can look through yourself as well, this idea of the dream through here of a reanimated corpse. Then she wakes swift as light and as cheering was the idea that broke it upon me. I have found it. What terrified me will terrify others, and I need only describe the spectre which had haunted my midnight pillow. On the morrow, I announced that I had thought of a story. I began that day with the words, "It was on a dreary night of November," making only a transcript of the grim terrors of my waking dream. In fact, this bit up here as well, where Frankenstein comes to life, is almost a replay of what's in the book itself. So again, we've got this sort of idea of truthfulness as well, that there's no alterations have been made, that it's a true recounting of a tale. So yet again, in true sort of novelistic fashion and 19th century fashion, the tale is set within a tale. It was then quickly produced into romantic drama. And there's some of the news reports there as well of melancholy news from Germany on the extraordinary weather, which affects the whole of Europe. So the entire sort of continent was almost sort of like enshrouded in a sort of twilight, I suppose. Pretty much like summer in Norway, or winter in Norway. When it comes down to it, polar night up in the north. Quite interesting to see as well. Here we've got sort of this is Boris Karloff, isn't it? Not Bela Lugosi. He's Dracula, and you can see how sort of Frankenstein becomes the name of almost the monster, and he sort of gets turned from this sort of very romantic, ironic figure of a sort of Satan, dark hero. You can link these together there, you see, with sort of Scarlet Letter and with some of the other texts. And then, of course, what's introduced over here as well is May Clark as sort of the damsel in distress look, though in this very nice sort of 1930s sort of jazz age flapperish style with the lovely red hair. I don't know if you'll be able to see this out of my video. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it. Probably not. I can only assume that you probably won't be able to hear the audio. But it doesn't really matter. We can still look at the images of how this sort of idea. You can probably hear it in the background. This is the moment, obviously, this is a later production after the Boris Karloff. Look at the science of the future that's going on as well. And this is going to end up, I know you probably can't hear it. Oh, can you play it? Oh, you can. Okay, good. Now we've gone back again as well. But this then comes up to the. You can probably hear it through my speaker. Mad scientist. Foil or sidekick. I can't click out of it. It stops the film. Anyway, I'm going to stop that as well for the minute. I've got the text makes it. It is. So this obviously comes to. I can't fast forward through it here, but it's up on the YouTube video, and it's in the PowerPoint as well that's been added, so you can have a look at it. It goes to that, and I'm sure you all know what's coming. It's the "it's alive" moment of this crazy scientist, with, of course, the sort of the added Igor with the hump as well. Compare that then to the actual moment in chapter 5, which you might have read. It was on a dreary night of November. The sentence she actually woke up with, that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils with an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, almost amounted to agony. I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 in the morning. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when by the glimmer of half-extinguished light I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. See quite a difference there in this sort of actually mirrors this moment, the sort of the actual sort of galvanic experiment of a frog sort of jerking to life that he did so famously in London, and it's full of foreboding rather than this sort of eureka moment of the "it's alive" of the later films. You might note how, number one, this little passage, how it's not too difficult to read, even though, yet again, because it's the 19th century, sentences seem to last for paragraphs. However, there's a strong use of sound, almost amounted to agony. That gives a sort of almost sort of like a mantra-like stress and emphasis on that certain little phrase, and you can see also lately patted against the panes, almost onomatopoeic, I think we'd say, as Louise was sort of pointing out there again. It's very strong devices, description and sound that are being used. Shelley, of course, is a poet and hangs out with poets. It's all very romantic. We talked about, and we've already looked at this. There's Heathcliff from Emily Bronte's. I always get those two mixed up in that last moment. Wuthering Heights, and we can see that here, Victor Frankenstein is almost like this sort of troubled character, and yet also this dark, brooding, satanic figure. We're confused as to whether it's the monster we should be rooting for, or whether it should be Victor in the end. And I think our natural sympathies extend to the monster who expresses his joy for life and his nobility through words. That's enough on Frankenstein. After the break, after the next section, we'll be going on and looking to a text which is quite strongly linked to this. Both of them, I think, if you're going to read together, you might want to think about the master and slave relationship of Crusoe. You might want to think about the figure of the romantic hero, or the dark hero, the Byronic hero, and the Adam and Eve power sexuality play that's drawn from the Bible, that's replayed in the Scarlet Letter, that's replayed in Jane Eyre, that's replayed in Frankenstein, the classic Gothic romantic text. So, Louise, I can ask you to stop recording there if you want to, as that's the end of the presentation. That would be very